everybody, and welcome back to another video. And if you're here for the very first time, you're very welcome. I'm Jane and my husband Mike is behind the camera. We're British, early retirees, we have no debt and we've paid off the mortgage. We live a thrifty, frugal and money-saving life here in Brittany in northwest France. And every Wednesday we invite you in for a midweek money chat. Now I had thrifty, frugal, money-saving parents. And I'm going to share with you today the valuable lessons that they taught me about the ways that you can save money. Now I learned to budget later in life, but I definitely saw my parents budget and live off a budget. And I'm sure this will resonate with many of you because budgets looked different then, didn't they? There would be a jar on the mantelpiece with the money for the milkman. There'd be a jar on the mantelpiece for the money for the coalman. There'd be a jar on the mantelpiece for the money for the rent man. There'd be a jar on the mantelpiece for the money for the housekeeping. So everything was budgeted for. And on a Friday night, my mum and my dad used to sit down and do the book, as they used to call it, which basically was a housekeeping entry book. So you had the money in and the money out and you accounted for everything. So they tracked their spending and they budgeted for absolutely everything. You could see how much money there was. You knew as a child that money was allocated and where it went. You knew that wasn't money that you could ask for, it was already spent. So there we go. I very much saw my parents budgeting. I knew what a budget was, and even that as a child, seeing that. And clearly what we would call that these days is an envelope system where money actually goes into a pot and you know what it is there for. So there you go. I definitely saw budgeting as a child. I knew money had a purpose. I knew money wasn't for spending on odds and ends. It had a place to go. So just as I do now, they did then and led by example. They gave every pound a job. As soon as they got paid, it went into the jars. We all knew where that money was going to go. Something that I think some parents don't teach their children now, I'm sure lots do, but I know lots don't, is to actually teach your children to go without. And it sounds harsh and it sounds hard, but it is such a valuable lesson that I learned at that age. And when you do learn to go without, you become stronger, you become more resilient. And as you go into adulthood, it's not such a big deal. For some people going into adulthood, it is a massive shock that you have to go without. The common thing that my parents would say to us if you asked for something was just plain no. They didn't give you an explanation, they didn't owe you an explanation. The answer was simply no. Can I do something? Can I have something? No. That was that, and you knew not to ask again. So you think to yourself, what has this got to do with money saving? Well, so many people now can't save money. And one of the reasons is they can't say no to themselves. Often I think, has no one said no to them in the past? Has no one said to them, no, you can't have that? Because I learned that at a very, very young age, and I've carried it with me throughout life. If I can't afford something, if it's not in my budget, quite simply, I go without. You might find this next one quite strange about money saving, but it is a really important lesson that they taught myself and obviously my brother and my sister as well, and themselves in their own process of growing up, is that you do not compare yourself to other people. It doesn't matter what anyone else has got. And you very easily say things as a child which are dismissive and throwaway. Well, girl down the road has got such and such, or the boy up the street has got such and such. And that would just be, you would just be cut short. And you would be reminded, a very salutary lesson that you'd be reminded all of the time of what you've got. That there's hot water coming out of that tap, that there's a light on up there, that there's coal in the fire, there's food in the fridge, and right now there is food in your belly. And we were reminded all of the time to be grateful for what we had and not to compare ourselves to other people. I have so much to thank my frugal parents for, because they taught us to have a backbone and strength of character, because you didn't compare yourselves to other people. You don't even try. Don't even try. You didn't have to be good as other people. You didn't have to own what other people had. And my parents did used to point out quite a lot of the time that, you know, we were the more fortunate children. And we did know that growing up, because I grew up in quite a poor area. You know, I had parents who had jobs and we could always pay the rent. We were never evicted. Nobody ever turned up at our house to take anything away. We always had food. We always had some form of heating. We didn't have a whole house heating. Nobody did in those days. But we definitely knew we were better off with other people. But we were taught very, very much not to compare ourselves to other people. And that has stayed with me. I don't care what people think of my house, of my clothing, of my appearance. I know my house is clean, my clothes are clean, that I am warm, that I am well fed, that I don't want for anything. So it stayed with me. And I know some of you have shared the difficulties that you have, that you'll have friends who do more than you or who have more than you. If my friends have got more than me or they do more than me, I'm happy for them. Good for them. But I don't worry about not doing those things. It has stayed with me for all 58 years of my life, is to not compare myself to other people. And I promise you, it saves me money. A great lesson I learnt from my parents about saving money was about having things secondhand and making do and mending. My parents were really, really good at furnishing their house for very low prices. We had an auction house near us called Cornelia Hall. They used to have a household sale every Thursday. And my dad would pop in either on a weekend or whenever he could, and he would leave some bids there. And he would rifle through boxes and open up bags and look for things. And lots of the things that we had were absolute bargains, were bought from those house sales. My mother was really good with jumble sales as well. I remember my mum buying jumpers, unpicking them, sitting there, winding up the wool and knitting us new things from it. I was really, really good at that. My parents were really good at everything from growing vegetables to fixing furniture to decorating the house themselves. Nobody came into our house ever and did any work in our house. They did everything themselves. They took a garden that was basically a field and turned it into a completely productive food garden. They stored food. They picked all their vegetables in the summer, and I remember chopping them up and freezing them, and just anything and everything that was to do with make, do and mend, or making the most of things secondhand. I learned from them. My mother and father have always had a very beautiful home with lovely flowers in the garden, and everything is, everything is painted and tidy and neat. And even now, in their old age, they still do it themselves. And I learnt that from them. So thank you, Mum and Dad. Great, great valuable skill in life there. To have a lovely house, do it yourself, make, do and mend, grow it yourself. What a lesson was that? Something else that my parents taught me in their very frugal ways was nothing was wasted. Clothing came from relatives. Our clothing went to other relatives. Household items got swapped between families. Nothing was wasted. Absolutely everything was composted. Every single scrap of wood ash was used in one way or another. We used to put cinders on the path in the garden, so that onto the gravel path, and it sort of bedded itself down over the years. Everything was used. Every single twig and cutting was kept for kindling. absolutely nothing was wasted. So clothing was reused. I can see my mother now. My mother would sit there in the evening mending clothing. My father used to fix things all of the time. Absolutely nothing was wasted. I would think barely nothing went into our dustbin once a week. Absolutely very little at all. So I saw that growing up. So thank you again, Mum and Dad, for teaching me the lessons that you don't waste anything at all. My parents loved anything and everything that was free, and let me give you some examples. All throughout the summer months, we would go out on walks and we would go blackberry picking, and I can remember us bringing back bucketfuls of blackberries, my mother setting them out on trays, putting them into the freezer, and then literally bags and bags and bags of blackberries in the freezer, and that would make blackberry jelly. So it's the jam with the seeds strained out of it, blackberry jelly, to keep us going all year. And then it would be crab apples, and then it would be sloes, and then it would be wild damsons. And the other part of free is my dad always grew all of our vegetables all the time. All year round we had vegetables out of our garden. And there's something else, that if my dad wasn't growing vegetables, he was fishing. And I grew up on tons of the fish that we ate. So I grew up on mackerel and on whiting in particular, because you could catch those from the harbour wall. And the other thing that he used to do, he used to go out periodically. He would pay to go out on a fishing trip, and he knew if they were going to go off fishing off the wrecks that he would come back with pollock. So much pollock. And pollock, I don't even know if you can catch it off the coast of Cornwall anymore. Please tell me it's still out there. But these were massive, massive fish, real deep in the water fish, and he would bring them back. And I can see my mum and dad now gutting those fish. The guts went into the garden, dug them into the ground, and all of that pollock being taken off the bone. Mum knew that we didn't like it very much. It's an acquired taste, pollock. I can remember my mum cooking it in big pans and then taking mashed potato and chopped parsley from the gardens and leftover bread, and the bread she made herself, may I add, and making fish cakes after fish cakes after fish cakes after fish cakes, disguising it in a way that would make it palatable to 3 kids who would rather eat whiting and mackerel than pollock. But free was such a good price. And I remember, and if anyone's my age and you grew up in the UK, you will know when Dutch elm disease swept through the UK, it transformed the landscape of the UK. But with Dutch elm disease, there were just so many dead trees that just needed to come down so that the disease didn't spread any further, that my dad and a friend of his used to go out with chainsaws, cutting down and cutting up these trees because they knew people wanted them taken down. And then there was firewood in our house for the fires. So we used to get free heat, free fish, free vegetables and free food. And my parents used to teach us that those activities were hobbies, that they were fun, that you did them as a family. And to this day, who doesn't love free stuff? I saved the most valuable lesson till last, and it was pretty obvious really, is that everything in our house was home cooked. I mean everything. The pastry for the jam tarts, the jam in the jam tarts, the pastry for the pasties, the homegrown vegetables that went into the pasties. Everything was home cooked. We never ate out. And I can remember friends coming to my house being absolutely overwhelmed with how much food there was. There would be homemade bread, there would be homemade jam. It was very, very humble food, but it was really, really quite healthy. I can remember being kind of teased as a child at school because often I would go to school with homemade bread with crabs, and that's another thing that we used to do. My dad used to take myself, my sister and my brother crabbing, and you have a great big long pole with a hook on the end, and you get into the rock pools at low tide, and you literally put the crabs live in holes under the rocks, and you literally pull these poor crabs out. And we used to come home with a bucket with a stone on top with the crabs fighting to get out and cook the crabs, and we went home and eat crab sandwiches. It was definitely and absolutely the food of resourceful people. But I grew up eating all of this food, and it gave me a palate to this day that will eat anything. That will eat anything. And I, to this day, love that feeling of cooking and putting food on the table. And I've never feel that desire, other than very occasionally, for someone else to cook for me. The greatest lesson that my thrifty and frugal parents taught me was how to cook properly from scratch. I thought I'd finish by telling you a funny little story. I speak to my parents every week, if not a couple of times a week, and my dad and I were discussing the cost of things in the shop and his methods and my methods of making sure that we get the best prices possible. And my dad told me that he was in the supermarket and he heard someone saying, "Here comes the yellow sticker man." And my dad turned around and realised that he was the yellow sticker man, because he goes around all the way around the shop looking for the reductions and the stickers. So he's 85 and he's still thrifty to this day. So there we go. Thank you to my parents for those valuable lessons that they taught me about being thrifty and frugal and saving money. Thank you so much for watching today. Thank you massively to everyone who hits the like button. I have a tiny request for you. I know that half of you who watch regularly are not subscribers. So go on, hit the subscription button, and it costs you nothing, and the little bell as well to notify you when we release videos. So thank you so much again, everybody, especially for all your comments, and we read every single one of them. And we'll see you soon. Bye for now.